Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouchian organization with your daily video update for October 23rd, 2024. I'm going to be presenting to you the fascinating juxtaposition of the BRICS meeting in Kazan, Russia, with the collective West continuing its provocations toward war and disintegration of the whole world economy. We start with the NATO decision to open a command center in the Baltic Ocean. This is to bottle up Russia, to extend NATO into the Baltic, and it violates the agreement that was reached to not move NATO eastward. This is a NATO military base in the former East Germany, and this decision was made at the same time at the same time that there are NATO military exercises all over Europe, and continued promises from NATO leaders to fund fully the continuing war in Ukraine against Russia, including support for Zelensky's dead-on-arrival peace process. Now, while this is occurring in Ukraine, we had an extraordinary event yesterday in Israel, where an Israeli settlers movement leader announced at a conference about the Gaza Strip. Here's what she said: "We came here with one clear purpose, to settle the entire Gaza Strip, not just part of it, not just a few settlements, the entire Gaza Strip from north to south." There were at least 1,000 people attending this conference, including National Security Minister and expansionist racist leader Ben-Gvir, who's the National Security Minister in the government. And they essentially called for a mass relocation of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. A Likud member of the Knesset named Gottlieb said, quote, "We need to occupy the complete land of Israel. There are no innocent people in Gaza. Everybody who has refused to leave the north is a collaborator," unquote. In other words, a target. And the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, are rampaging against Palestinians in North Gaza. They also hit the largest hospital complex in Beirut. And this is occurring as Secretary of State Blinken is meeting with Netanyahu, supposedly to arrange a ceasefire. Now, there are few details from the meeting, but likely nothing will change as far as the Israeli military attacks. And there's still anxiety over how and when Israel will respond to Iran's October 1st missile strike on Israeli military targets. I should note there was an interesting article in Haaretz, one of the leading dailies in Israel, with the headline, "The Deadly Racism Behind Israel's Policy Toward the Palestinians," unquote. So here we see a desperate Western alliance supporting the continued rampage of the Israelis in Gaza, in Lebanon, threatening Syria, threatening Iran, as well as the expansion of NATO in Europe. While this is going on, there's an alternative emerging to the imperial neo-colonialists. And that's with the BRICS conference, which opened yesterday in Kazan, Russia. Despite claims that Putin and Russia are isolated, there were over 12,000 people in attendance, delegations from 36 nations, including 24 heads of state. Today is the major day of discussion. Yesterday, there were mostly bilateral discussions, but these will continue. Today, Modi of India and Xi Jinping of China will meet for the first time in 5 years. And this is after successful negotiations reached an agreement to end the border controversy that's been flaring up between the two countries. Now, our reporter on the scene, Jason Ross, filed a report which will be linked in the description section of today's update. Now, most interesting in Jason's report is he said that the BRICS leaders and members don't see themselves as a military alliance like a counter to NATO, but as an economic grouping, where security ultimately depends on cooperation for development. Well, that's significant. That's important because that's the basis of true peace. Now, the Washington Post demonstrated the panic that's seizing Western unilateralists in an article headlined, "The Growing Tension Within the BRICS," unquote. Now, what they report on is, as the one example of this, is that India is not so happy about the increase of members that are being considered for inclusion in the BRICS. There are, in addition to the 9 members that are there, discussion among 30 other countries, major countries, including Indonesia and Malaysia, about joining the BRICS. Now, the fact that the Indians are hesitant about that's hardly an example of major tension. But the article then goes on to get to the point that non-Western states are meeting to form a powerful coalition against Western neo-colonial powers to protect their members from a, quote, hostile West, unquote. And this is, I think, an accurate assessment of what is moving these countries. The fact that they see no potential for development coming from the West. They see a commitment to carrying out irregular warfare policies, regime change coups, color revolutions, and so on, rather than working to ensure there'll be credit available for development of these economies. And that's why they're turning to the BRICS. Even though the BRICS does not have yet a full program, it's converging on that, including working out payment settlements and so on. Now, while this is going on, there's a growing concern about economic instability in the West. Let me just give you a couple of examples. The debt problem. Most of the debt, including government debt, private sector debt, corporate debt, is uncollectible. That in order to make it through the end of the year, especially through the November election in the United States, there are rollovers going on of debt, and the rollovers are being financed through lowering interest rates. This is not a solution. All they're doing is increasing long-term debt to give the illusion of solvency, when in fact many of these firms and companies and private families are essentially bankrupt. A second example, the collapse of the auto sector in Germany. The gamble that everyone would move to electric cars and they could phase out the combustion engine, they're finally acknowledging that that's not going to work, that people don't want that. It's too expensive. They can't compete with China. And as a result, the German auto industry is in a profound crisis of its own making because it's submitted to the insanity of the green policies. Now, a third example is the overall rebellion against deindustrialization. The latest on record is the Industrial Association of Northern Italy in Lombard called for a reversal of the European Union green policy and fiscal policies. And of course, you see the unpopularity of the governments of Europe, as well as the unpopularity of the alternatives for the United States in the presidential election. Now, LaRouche identified the potential of what's emerging in Kazan, Russia, as early as 1975 with his drafting of a proposal called the International Development Bank. And LaRouche's idea was get out of the IMF, stop the imposition of austerity, and figure out a way to have a consistent credit policy which will ensure that there's credit for those projects which add to the overall wealth production capability of a nation by increasing the productivity of its labor force through scientific and technological progress. This is the only thing that makes sense. And because this challenged the existing International Monetary Fund system, the central bank policy, the private sector's attempt to strangle government, to force government to act on behalf of the corporate cartels, they did everything they could to kill LaRouche. They jailed him. They tried to shut down our organization to defeat the idea. But they didn't defeat the idea. LaRouchian's ideas are thriving. They're alive and well in the background of the discussions going on in the BRICS countries in Kazan right now. We're still here, shaping the fight for the future. And I'm asking you to join us, share this video, do what you can to get people to see that this is not a Lockean or Hobbesian universe of each against all, but that cooperation and collaboration is the direction for the future. And that future is being shaped right now, not in Washington, not in London, not in Paris or Berlin or Brussels, but in Kazan, Russia, and in nations throughout the global South. So join us and help us make that happen.